Hey, what's new and exciting? It's Kevin O'Shaughnessy here, and in this video we are going to continue our exploration of the major scale, this time with the 3 notes per string fingering, which I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with, but do you really know it? All right. Now, if you haven't seen the previous 2 videos, I definitely recommend checking them out before we get into this. We covered a lot of vocabulary in that, including the formula for the major scale in whole steps and half steps. We also covered the sharp keys and the flat keys, and the names of the notes in those keys and those scales along the neck. And that's generally how I'm going to be referring to things in this video. So if you haven't done that, go check out those other 2 videos, and that'll get you a little bit better prepared for what we're going to cover here. Okay, so 3 notes per string. You're probably familiar with that major scale fingering, right? It's if I'm over here at the 8th fret, this is going to be the key of C, and we've got 8th fret, 10th, 12th, and then 8, 10, 12 again, and then we've got 9, 10, 12, 9, 10, 12, and then we've got to do what I typically refer to as the B string compensation, right? We got to move up 1 fret because of the way the B string is tuned compared to everything else. We've got 10, 12, 13, and then again 10, 12, 13, okay? Now, this, if you went through the previous video and you saw the flat keys, you'll know that we did the F major scale along both the low and high E strings, right? So if we review that scale, we've got F, G, A, B flat, C, and that's where we want to start, okay? Because as far as our keys are concerned, there's no sharps or flats in the key of C. So it makes it easy to grab onto when we're naming notes and the like. So we've got our C here at the 8th fret. Now, if we remember doing the C major scale on the B string originally, which was here at the 1st fret, we have the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, okay? And we can take that entire formula and that combination of letters and apply that to this 3 notes per string fingering like this. We've got C, D, E, and then F, G, A, and then B, C, okay? Now you might notice that I used a specific fingering. This is the one that I recommended in the previous videos. 1, 2, 4, and then change positions. 1, 2, 4, and then 1, 2. And this is why we're keeping the same fingering in the 3 notes per string approach. 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2. Okay? So look at this. We've only gotten from the E string to the D string, and we've already completed the scale. Now, that was something that when I was learning 3 notes per string scales, this was before I learned where the notes were on the neck, and I kind of skipped over a lot of stuff because I took lessons for a while, but then I started teaching myself some things. I gave up on those lessons and I started working on my own thing. And so I skipped over a lot of stuff, like probably many of you, right? So when I learned 3 notes per string fingerings, I just learned it as this one block of scale, right? So it's this 6-string scale. Right? And that's not really how the scale works. It's actually just the first 7 notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And then the whole thing starts all over again. So I'm going to take a quick aside right here, just in case you guys are wondering why we use letter names for the notes. Well, this is why. It has to do with how those notes are related to each other, how the frequencies of those notes are related to each other. So let me go back here to the high E string. If I go up to the 5th fret, what I have is an A. Specifically, what I have is A440, which you might notice as being the tuning reference for our whole system of music, right? Well, what that means is that this string is vibrating 440 times each second to generate this pitch. Now, if I go down an octave and I play this A here on the G string at the 2nd fret, this one is vibrating at 220 hertz, right? So you see I cut the frequency number in half, and that gives me the next lowest octave. If I cut it in half again, I get the pitch of the low A on the guitar, right? So there's A, that's 110 hertz. And if I take that another octave lower, that gives me the low A string on the bass guitar, and that rumbles at about 55 hertz. Okay, so you see every time we go down, we cut the frequency in half. So as you might expect, if I'm up here and I go up an octave, that's going to be 880 hertz. Okay, so that relationship, that 2-to-1 relationship between the high note and the low note in the octave is what creates this pitch class that we call A. And every pitch ever on any instrument, whether it's the guitar, the piano, whatever, all of their pitches work that way. So they all have this one pitch class. So in the case of the 3 notes per string fingering, right, we'll cover this in just a second, but we've got C, here's the C an octave up, and here's another C an octave up. And if I really want to go so far, here's another C an octave up, right? So those are all C's because the higher notes to the lower notes always have this 2-to-1 relationship. This is vibrating twice as fast as this one, which is vibrating twice as fast as this one, which is vibrating twice as fast as this one. So I hope that all makes sense. So let's get back to the scale. So we've just figured out we've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So now we can continue up. These next frets are going to have the same names, the same letter names. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now you might also notice that at this point we're on the B string. These are the last 3 notes of our linear scale fingering. Okay, that's going to be cool, so hang on to that for just a second. So here we are at C again. Now we've got D, E, F. Okay, and those are the notes for our scale. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay? And what is so cool about all of this kind of stuff is that now what we've done is we've taken our linear scale, the same fingering, same letter name, same everything, and we've just stacked it. We've compressed it into basically one position. Now in this case, I'm playing this an octave lower, right? But that's the same, those are the same notes. It's the same, they're the same pitch classes, which is really cool. So now, not only do we know a majority of the notes on the B string, but we also know some notes crossing these 3 strings, which is pretty cool. Now, here's something else that's really neat. At least I think it's neat. It's cool, it's awesome, you can call it whatever the hell you want to call it. But what's really cool is that wherever that C is, you can follow that major scale formula, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, and move up and down along that string. And that gives you some new phrasing opportunities. So for example, I might be playing a melody. I'm just going to go up and down the scales, but let me show you what I'm talking about. I might be playing a melody that starts down here on the B string on this C. Right? So they're just, I'm not really playing anything, but check this out. I'm not playing anything special, I should say. It's not unique in any way. It's not even really a melody. I'm just kind of giving you an idea of what this means. So I can play this fingering. And I can move in and out of the 3 notes per string scale and the linear version of the scale on the B string. Now, I said there was a C here, right? So there's this C on the D string. This is at the 10th fret. Well, if I continue the scale up, I can do the same thing. I've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Now, I run out of frets, but if you've got, a 24 fret guitar or something, you can get that C too. It also means I can go backwards. C, B, A, G, F, E to the open D string, and of course C is here at the 3rd fret on the A string. But that also means if C is on the 3rd fret on the A string, I can continue that scale up going this way as well. I can go C, D, E, F, G, A. Now if you notice the position that I'm in that 3 notes per string fingering for C that we introduced at the beginning of the video. Right? And the purpose of getting in and out of the scale like that and moving from the linear version to the 3 notes per string version is one of, excuse me, phrasing. Okay, I can do all kinds of cool slides and things like that to get from one note to the next if I'm using the linear version of this scale, but not as much if I'm using the 3 notes per string version of the scale. So basically, no matter where you are in the scale, you can get from the linear version to the 3 notes per string version. I'm going to give you one other little bonus tip on this too, is that no matter where you are, you can start a 3 notes per string fingering. All right, if you want to be able to add something really quick, there's nothing to say that you have to start it here. Once you've learned where all of the C's are, right? If you're playing in the key of C major, you learn where all the C's are. This fingering, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, is going to be the same no matter what. Right? The only difference, of course, is when you have to cross that B string, because we've got that B string compensation. See here, I've got to shift up 1 fret. Right, I got to shift up that 1 fret, but it's the same fingering, right? Which is very, very cool. Up here is the same thing. Down here. These are all C's that I'm starting on, and I can play the scale up and down 1 octave, which is a very cool way to go. Right, just kind of goofing off there, but you get the idea. Like, here it is. So it doesn't really matter where I am on the neck. Chances are awesome. There's a C that I can get to, and there's part of this fingering that I can use, which is great. So if you're confused by that, see, now what I would recommend doing, of course, is once you get kind of familiar with C, move on to the G, then the D, then the A, then the E, right? Following that circle of fifths like we talked about in the first 2 videos. And start mapping it all out. They're all going to start on the low E string, right? And by now, if you have gone through the first 2 videos, you should know what all of the names of the notes are on the low E string. So you can start working that out in this fashion along the neck, laterally along the neck. We went linearly, now we're going laterally along the neck. So you can work that all out too and get very familiar with them. And if this is at all confusing, there's 2 things that I would say. I would say, number 1, pick 1 key to start with. Okay, whatever key the majority of the songs you know, whatever key that is, start with that. Okay, if you have a hard time figuring out what key that is, chances are really good, although it's not an absolute thing, but a lot of times, whatever the first chord of the song is, that's the key you're in. Okay, like I said, not absolute, but it happens a lot. Excuse me. So if the first chord in your song is G, chances are awesome you're in the key of G. So you use the G major scale. Learn that one. Learn the linear version up here. Excuse me, which is going to be the same thing down here. Right? And then learn the 3 notes per scale version. Okay? Naming the notes as you go. But, excuse me, naming the notes as you go. But pick 1 key and work on that and really start to memorize it, okay? Then you can play around with moving in and out of the linear version and in and out of the 3 notes per scale version and trying to combine them a little bit within the songs you know. The second thing that I would point out is this is going to sound a little weird, but don't try too hard to understand it just yet, okay? This is going to be whenever I've had students that have been I've presented this kind of material to, the first thing is like, I don't get it. Trust me right now when I say that at this point, you don't need to get it. You need to memorize it, okay? When we're kids and we're learning how to talk, we learn how to talk before we learn anything about writing, before we learn anything about our alphabet, before we learn anything about spelling words. And we learn our alphabet usually through a song, right? We learn our ABC song. But at what point does your average 2-year-old look at the teacher and say, why is that called an A? Why does the B make that sound, right? We don't ask those questions. We don't think to ask those questions. We learn it first. We memorize it first. And then the more we see it in action and the more we learn, the more information we learn about it and how it works with the other concepts in music, that's when it all starts to make sense. That's when the understanding develops. But for right now, this stuff about the scales and the names of the notes within the scales simply needs to be memorized. You got to get it in your head. You got to get it under your fingers, okay? And don't worry too much. Like, I'm giving you all of the answers right now. Okay, I'm telling you the names of the notes. I'm telling you what frets they're on. So you don't need to worry about getting it in that sense. Right now, you just have to learn it. You just have to memorize it. In future videos, we'll talk about, you know, the ins and outs and the whys and the hows and all of that kind of stuff. But right now, this is just building up just a consistent vocabulary, a common vocabulary between you and me, so that we can continue to talk about scales, how those scales become chords, how those chords become progressions, those progressions become songs, etc., etc., etc. All right, so I hope that makes a little sense. So if you're confused, like I said, start with one scale and work it out in both ways, and try not to let yourself get hung up on understanding all of it. Go through the video a few times and just try to memorize it. And I promise you, you will get farther with it a lot faster. And I'll be going through all of the rest of this stuff and all the information you need to know a little further on down the line. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to wrap this up. Good luck. If you do find this helpful and useful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and share it with anybody else that you think might also get some use out of it. Until then, I am Kevin O'Shaughnessy, and I will see you in the next video.